All right. That's a terrible way to start any sort of sentence. All right, and and then I go right back to saying. So let us pick up on chapter 6, section 6 here of thinking about the early aeronauts. Okay. And so why Ishmael is using this as an example is the idea of, again, what we're thinking about, what we're looking for is, how things came to be this way, right? Why is it the case that we need so many prophets to tell us how it is we ought to live? Shouldn't we be able to figure that out on our own? Okay. And so now we have this kind of anecdote of the aeronauts of the first air people, right? And the idea that air persons, whoever is trying to, again, learn how to fly, they are subject to various laws that they can't change, right? And so in that, right, what might be laws that we are subject to that we can't change as human beings, even if we think we are exempt from those laws? Okay. The laws of aerodynamics don't provide us with a way of defining the law of gravity, blah, 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 right? The law we're looking for is like the law of gravity. There's no escaping it, but it's the way of achieving the equivalent of flight, the equivalent of freedom of the air. In other words, it is possible to build a civilization that flies. Okay? Blah, 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 taker. As our flight begins, all is well. Our would-be air person has been pushed off the ledge of the cliff and is pedaling away. Okay? The wings of the craft are flapping like crazy. The feeling is wonderful, ecstatic. She's experiencing the freedom of the air. Okay? What they don't realize, right? What they don't realize, however, is that the craft is aerodynamically incapable of flight. This simply is in compliance with the laws that make flight possible, blah, 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 right? But nevertheless, keeps going. Okay? His disillusionment is a long way off in time and space. Then he's in a free fall, feeling wonderful, congratulating himself on a triumph. He is like the man who, in the joke, who jumps off the 19th floor window as a bet. As he passes to the 10th floor, he says to himself, "Well, so far so good." Right? Blah blah blah. We go on a couple of pages here. Right? My craft is I'm on page 107. My craft has brought me this far. In safety, he tells himself, I have to keep going. And so he starts pedaling away with all his might, which of course does him no good at all, because his craft simply isn't in accord with the laws of aerodynamics. Even if he had the power of 1,000 humans in his legs, 10,000, a million, the craft is not going to achieve flight. The craft is doomed, and so is he unless he abandons it, right? And as he's flying over, he sees all of these other flying contraptions, blah, 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 right? Ishmael said and Ishmael says this on page 107. Here's the connection. 10,000 years ago, people of your culture embarked on a similar flight, civilizational flight. Their craft wasn't designed according to any theory at all. Like our imaginary air person, they were totally unaware of the law that must be complied with in order to achieve civilizational flight. They didn't even wonder about it. They wanted freedom of the air, so they pushed off the first contraption that came to mind, and then stupid name, the Taker Thunderbolt. At first all was well. In fact, all was terrific. The takers were pedaling away. The wings of the craft were flapping beautifully. They felt wonderful, exhilarated. They were experiencing freedom of the air, freedom over restraints that bind and limit the rest of the biological community. And with that freedom came marvels, all the things you mentioned the other day. Urbanization, technology, literacy, mathematics, science. The flight could never end. It could only go on becoming more and more exciting. They couldn't even have guessed that. Like our hapless air person, they were in the air, but not in flight. Okay? They were in a free fall because their craft simply was not in compliance with the law that makes flight possible. Continuing on here. Okay? Nevertheless, just as predicted, famine soon becomes the routine condition. Blah, blah, blah. Taker Thunderbolt and takers have to pedal even harder, more difficultly than ever before. But oddly enough, they're harder and more efficiently they pedal. The worst conditions become very strange. Blah, blah, blah. But such simple answers aren't enough to reassure your people of your culture nowadays. Everyone is looking down, and it's obvious that the ground is rushing up toward you and rushing up faster and faster each year. Basic ecological planetary systems are being impacted by Taker Thunderbolt, and the impact causes intensity every year. Basic irreplaceable resources being devoured every year, and they've been devoured more and more greedily every year, whose species disappearing as a result of our encroachment, blah, 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 right? So again, this idea that as we keep flying, it keeps going, right? At last I said something of my own. The worst part of this, I said, that the survivors, if there are any, they will immediately set about doing this all over again, right? Taking and embarking on a civilizational flight. Yes, I'm afraid you're right. Trial and error isn't a bad way to learn how to build an aircraft, but it can be a disastrous way to learn how to build a civilization. Okay? And just kind of in that and kind of like hearing those words out loud and maybe kind of wrestling with them a little bit more, it gives you a little bit more of a concrete way to investigate and to connect with your paper prompt for yesterday, due tomorrow. Due Friday. Sorry. And thinking about that, right? What are we getting at here, right? This idea of thinking about laws of aerodynamics, and is it the case that us as takers, because undoubtedly we are takers, are we living in accordance with the laws, or are we trying to exempt ourselves from the laws, right? In the same way that these aeronauts, deceive themselves that everything's fine, but they're actually in a free fall. Is it the fact that we have deceived ourselves, but we're actually in a free fall? All right. The next section or chapter 7, section 1. Okay, this is kind of trippy, right? We get the scheme of the A's, B's, and C's. Okay. Blah 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 blah. You're visiting a land, and they say blah blah blah. Eventually, you piece together the whole ghastly scheme: A's, B's, and C's. The A's are eaten by the B's are eaten by C's, and C's are in turn eaten by A's. This is no hierarchy among these food classes. The C's don't lord it over B's just because B's are their food, because, after all, they themselves are A's. It's perfectly democratic and friendly, but of course it's all perfectly dreadful to you, and you ask how could they stand to live in this lawless way. Once again, they look at you in bafflement. What do you mean lawless? We have a law, and we follow it invariably. This is why we are friendly and cheerful and peaceable and all those other things you find so attractive about us. This law is the foundation of our success as a people and has been so from the beginning. Okay? So, again, this idea of there are A's, B's, and C's. Okay? These are not food preferences. Okay? All they are is the fact that this is the law that everybody kind of follows. Okay? They have a law, they follow it invariably, and because they follow it invariably, they have highly successful society. Right? Okay? Blah, 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 A, B's, and C's. All right. There's going to be an execution after all. For the first time in history, someone has broken the law that is the foundation of their society. They are outraged, horrified, astounded. They take the offender, cut him into little bits, and feed him to the dogs. This should help you discover their law. Yes, blah, 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 blah. He broke the law. What specifically to do? He lived contrary to the law. I glared at him. That's not fair. You're not answering my question. I tell you the whole sorry tale is public record. You're man. His biography, blah, 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 is every day, blah, 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 blah. All right. So how are you going to use this biography? Yeah. He tried to live outside the law. He did something that they never do. Okay. Very good. These are precisely the three guidelines you have. These are the three guidelines you have to the law we're looking for. The community of life on this planet has worked well for 3 billion years. Has worked beautifully, in fact. The takers draw back in horror from this community, thinking it to be a place of lawless chaos, savage, relentless competition, where every creature goes in terror of its life. But those of your species who actually live in this community do not find it to be so. They will fight to the death rather than be separated from it. Okay? In fact, it's an orderly community. The green plants are food for the plant eaters, which are food for the predators, and some of the predators are still food for other predators. Okay? All this comes about because there is a law followed invariably within the community. So again, we're looking for this law that, again, it's a peacekeeping law, a law that keeps the community from turning into howling chaos. Right? Blah, blah, blah. In 10,000 years, one branch of the family, Homo sapiens sapiens, said, humans are exempt from this law. The gods never meant us to be bound by it. So they built a civilization that flouts, That flouts, I'm just going to keep saying the word flouts, the law at every point within 500 generations, eye blink scale, biological age, brands, Homo sapiens, sapiens, saw there, blah, 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 death of what? Humans lived harmlessly with this planet for 3 million years, and the takers have brought the whole thing to the point of collapse, only 500 generations, and their explanations for this is what? I see what you mean. Their explanation is that something is fundamentally wrong with people. Takers may be doing something wrong, but rather there's something fundamentally wrong with human nature itself. That's right, blah, blah, blah. I'm having my doubts. All right. And so kind of in this, again, examination that Ishmael and the narrator are having here, what we're finding and what we're kind of getting at is this notion, right, that us takers have exempted ourselves from laws that in fact we are still subject to, right? Just like the law of aerodynamics that, the first aeronauts said, "Oh, we're good. We're going to do it. We will succeed." But in fact, they're still subject to the laws, right? And even as much as we try to live outside the law, even as much as we try to exempt ourselves from it, inevitably we are still always subject to it. That we have tried to live outside of these laws of the biotic community, of these laws of kind of the natural order of things, because we have this self-imposed sense of importance, when in fact, that's going to be our downfall, right? So is there a way, Ishmael is going to ask, that we can live more in connection with and in recognition of kind of our connectedness to other species and to our place in this overall biotic community? Is there a way that we can fit into this scheme of the A, B's, and C's? Okay. All right, stop there.